You're listening to episode 94 of Literacy in Color. We hear a lot about the importance of vocabulary instruction, but what does effective vocabulary teaching actually look like in the classroom? Today, I'm joined by three incredible literacy lifters, Dr. Tim Rasinski, Melissa Cheesman-Smith, and Savannah Campbell, to discuss their newest resource, the Megabook of Vocabulary. In this episode, we unpack why vocabulary is truly the foundation of comprehension, how morphology and word consciousness support literacy growth, and practical ways teachers can build language-rich classrooms without turning vocabulary into rote memorization. This conversation is packed with research, playful word learning ideas, and actionable strategies you can bring into your classroom tomorrow. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am overjoyed to be joined by Dr. Tim Rasinski, who is the king of fluency, along with his co-authors, Melissa Cheesman-Smith and my good friend, Savannah Campbell. And recently, they have joined forces to write the Megabook of Vocabulary, which is such an incredibly beautiful resource. I always think vocabulary is a beast to teach, and now we have a beast of strategies all in one book to have all of our sources together. So congratulations on your book, and welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you all here today.
Thank you.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So maybe we can start off with a little introduction in who you are, what you do, and how you got into this work, and perhaps even sharing the impetus of this book, how the Megabook of Vocabulary was born.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll do my two bits here. Tim Rasinski, I'm an now retired professor from Kent State University, where I worked for close to 40 years. I ran the reading clinic, and my interest is in struggling readers. And what I have found in my own work is that reading fluency and vocabulary, in addition to phonics, are keys for kids to become successful in reading. Melissa and I actually met, I don't know how many years ago it was, Melissa, but I was at a conference outside of Phoenix, I believe it was, and gave a talk on reading fluency. And she came up to me and she said, I've been trying out some of your ideas and putting the teacher spin on them, and they really work. And would you be interested in doing a book? And I said, of course I would. And of course, that led to the Megabook of Fluency, which is the original book in this series. But one of the unique features of our book is that it is a collaboration between researcher, that's what you like to call me, and people who are out in the field right now, teachers. And you don't see that very often in books that are published. And I think that's really, I feel privileged to be able to work with people like Melissa and Savannah, because these are the folks that are out there on the front line. So I just love that idea being one of the unique parts of our book.
Melissa Smith, and I've been in education for about 25 years and worked mostly with upper elementary students. And really this book came about at such a great time, I think, in education, because we are understanding more these two important components of background knowledge and vocabulary being so important to comprehension. And so we did this book with the vocabulary in mind, because sometimes there are a lack of resources out there. There's lots of books about just morphology, or maybe about just vocabulary, but they're not connected to anything else you're doing during the day. So sometimes it's hard to know where to put them. So we've made this book very user-friendly, so that whether you're working on some individual words or you want to work on things that are in your standards with figurative language, that this meets all those needs.
And I'm Savannah Campbell. I've been teaching now for the past 15 years. And I'm with Tim. My work really does focus a lot on struggling readers. I really hope with the work that I do to get to help level the playing field for all of our kids. All of our kids deserve a chance at a literate life. And that's really the way I operate in this world. And I got brought into this Megabook world a little bit later. And I am just so incredibly grateful. I feel very humbled to have gotten to work with Melissa and Tim and to get to learn from them. And I think something people don't realize about writing a book is you yourself learn a lot in the process too. And so I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to have Melissa and Tim with me, because I would have just crawled into a corner and cried if it was just me.
What a beautiful joint effort. And that's why I love your team too, because you have that researcher's point of view and the practitioner lens. And then you could toggle back and forth and say, hey, is this supported by research? And why, yes, it is. And actually, it works with kids too. So it's so powerful in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So maybe we can start our conversation leading with the research and talk about some of the key findings in research that talk about the importance of having a robust vocabulary.
Okay, I'll take a try at that one. We have a very, well, I'll use that word robust again, robust body of research related to vocabulary and overall reading proficiency. Well over 100 years. Works from Bill Nagy, Richard Anderson, Jim Bauman, Camille Blackowitz, and many others have shown that vocabulary is related to comprehension. And it just makes sense. You're less likely to understand something if you don't know what the words mean. And of course, more likely to understand what you're reading if you do have an understanding of the words. But this doesn't just apply. Sometimes we think that it only applies to literary texts, but think about the academic vocabulary, mathematics, social studies, science, words like demographics, photosynthesis, polygon, respiration. What we know is that these words are words that trip kids up a lot because, they're not familiar, and yet they are key to understanding science, social studies, mathematics, and so on. What we know is many of the things that are in our book help kids gain meaning from them, in particular, the use of word roots. Demographics, we know that dem means people. Photosynthesis, we know that photo means light. Polygon means many angles, and so on. I could go on and on. I think we're going to talk about this a little later. But upwards of 90% of our academic vocabulary is derived from Latin and Greek word roots, which we feature big time in our book. So we're in the science of reading error, and I think the science clearly shows that vocabulary and vocabulary instruction is well worth it. And I might throw that into writing as well, and we could talk about speaking and listening too. In writing, if you have more words to choose from, your writing will improve. I've never seen a writing rubric that we use to assess students' writing that doesn't have word choice as one of those features that we grade kids on. Kids with larger vocabularies are more likely to write material that is, just of better, higher quality. So don't want to summarize the research, but I can tell you the science of reading definitely supports teaching vocabulary for reading, for writing, for listening, and for speaking as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I heard you say is how vocabulary really fuels comprehension. Mm-hmm. Yet when we look at that science of reading model that's often used, Scarborough's reading rope, we see vocabulary as part of the language comprehension strands, and comprehension, reading comprehension, is the end result. So how does vocabulary knowledge really support comprehension, and what happens when it's missing from instruction?
So as I was saying before, two of the things that stand out a lot are background knowledge and vocabulary for kids. We know that those are the two biggest supports for comprehension success. And that isn't something that we can build overnight. In fact, both of them have very unique challenge because there isn't a list from A to Z of every topic that students need to have background knowledge about. And there isn't a list from kindergarten to 12th grade of every word that kids should know in certain grade levels. Certainly, researchers have attempted to try to do this, but it's really something where both of those things that students really need are not clear. It's not black and white for us. And so as teachers, we just have to integrate a lot of it. It's a kind of a volume thing. So for background knowledge, we have to be choosing topics that we are possibly already studying through literature or through content. And then our vocabulary, we have to see what does the text that we're using lend well to. A student can't read something if they don't understand something on the word level. They're going to be struggling to understand it on the sentence level and on the paragraph level too. So we know that it's such an important part of that, where sometimes it's best to have students read the text and then talk about the vocabulary. And sometimes we front load it. And as teachers, that's why we are all artists and scientists, that we have to know our students well to know how to integrate that, because we don't want to dumb our text down for kids, especially kids that are struggling readers and that might already be behind. And if we're giving them text that's behind grade level, they're going to have a hard time coming up and reaching that. So scaffolding that vocabulary and scaffolding that background knowledge for them so that they can have comprehension success is the key.
I was going to say too, this is also why it's so important that our children are not pulled out of science and social studies classes. You talk about like the watered down understandings, and what ends up happening is they're often pulled from a science class or a social studies class for a reading intervention. So they're taught to decode, but then while they're out of that class, they're missing the very background knowledge and vocabulary that they need that could have helped them to access the grade level curriculum. And then when they're in reading class, all they're given access to is things that are on quote unquote their level. And so it just really is important that we don't forget about the science and the social studies for every single child.
And I'm going to throw in my 2 cents also. There's research that is just coming out in the last couple of years that shows we actually get greater benefit for students when they read material that is challenging, for lack of a better term, Tim Shanahan's work. And if you think about it, kids can handle more difficult material, but we have to give them support. And one way of supporting them is with the vocabulary, because it's the words that make the text more difficult for students. And if we can help them with that vocabulary, we're going to allow them to deal with more challenging text and so accelerating their progress in reading. One of the things I used to tell my class when I taught the phonics course is, what good is it to decode a word if you don't know what it means? It's a nonsense word, right? For at least for you. We have to focus on meaning.
Absolutely. And you guys tackle the nuance in that so beautifully. Like Melissa, you just said, it's difficult to navigate. Which words do we prioritize? Which words do we teach? We can't teach all the words in the world. So we have to be strategic, and the opportunities that we have in the classroom to see the students in front of us and to consider the content that we're teaching and taking those all into consideration. And when we're designing our vocabulary instruction, what would you say are some of the non-negotiables that teachers should consider?
I think one that I briefly touched on earlier was that vocabulary is comprehension. We've a lot of times separated that into, we have phonics and we have fluency and we have vocabulary and comprehension, but vocabulary is comprehension. It's just on that word level. And so we know how important that is to not gloss over that when we're teaching. We don't just, and people, especially that are bound by maybe certain programs, they'll pull out vocabulary for you that they want you to teach with this certain text. But certainly vocabulary comes up in other areas of the day. And as a teacher, we have a lot of control over that, because what are we doing all day? We're talking with kids, and the language that we use matters. I think another non-negotiable is not ignoring the standards that you have for your state when it comes to the language standards, because sometimes we just look just at the reading ones or just at the writing ones, but most states have, these language standards, and we have national ones too, where they do give us some guidance so that we don't forget that we've got to be working on connotation and denotation, where we have to be working on figurative language and word associations and how to categorize words. So keeping your standards in mind so that our kids can be ready for the next grade, but also just how we talk to kids during the day, keeping vocabulary at the forefront of everything that we do in all of our interactions with kids, that we're using words that will build their vocabulary and build background knowledge for them.
Yeah. And having that language-rich environment, right, where some of the teaching's explicit, but some of it's implicit, just by being mindful of the language that we're choosing to use. I love
Great
that.
point.
Yeah. And there can be tension even when we think about explicit instruction on, do we teach X amount of words during a week, or do we take fewer words and go deeper? So how should teachers think about the balance between kind of the breadth of vocabulary and the depth?
Yeah, so I think something that we really need to keep in mind when we're talking about like how many words we're going to teach is this notion that not all words are created equal, despite the fact that your core reading program is probably having you teach them as though they are all equal. And so once our kids enter into formal schooling, they learn between 3,000 and 4,000 words a year. We are not going to be able to teach them to the depth that we want. There are many ways that we can know a word, right? So if you've ever had, and this kind of like what Tim was saying, if you've ever had a child who has read a word to you like a question, like if I said impecunious, I obviously am able to decode it, but I have no knowledge of the word. So that's like our lowest level of knowing a word, is you can read it, but you can't understand it. And then the next level that we have is really this like narrow, contextually bound knowledge. And that tends to be where we stop instruction. We teach them a word within the context of the story that they're reading. We do it for that week, and then we move on with our lives. Moving on from that is when you kind of know the word, but you can't really recall it or use it in appropriate situations. So for example, that word impecunious, I've been using that example a lot because it is a word that means poor, and I read it in a book. And so like, I know it means poor, but I'm not able to like readily use that word in everyday conversation. And then really the last way you can know a word, and I'm going to give you a quote from Graves. He said it's this rich, decontextualized knowledge of a word's meaning, its relationship to other words, and its extension to metaphorical uses. So I think what's important when we talk about how many words we're going through is you are not going to take children to the decontextualized stage for all 4,000 words. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is the words that we go really deep in, the words that we are explicitly teaching and we're spending that amount of time on, make sure that they are high utility words that are going to matter not just for this class, but for other texts and other classrooms. And that's really what I want you to think about when you are thinking about what to teach. Which words matter most? Because some of them you can just say like, oh, well, this just means, I don't know why locomotive popped in my head. It's a word in one of the manuals, but locomotive is just a train. I don't need to go through the kid-friendly definition and the examples and context. Like I don't have to do all of that for that word. I can just say it's a train. So just recognizing that there, yes, are a lot of words, but there's this continuum, and we just want to make sure that the words that we explicitly teach are of the highest utility.
I love that. I love that example. And it really makes you think philosophically, right? Like, what's it mean to truly know a word? And to what level do we want students to go for particular words? And it might be different, like you said, for the different words in our language. So that's a really great breakdown. Let's dive into your book now. The Megabook of Vocabulary has hit the shelves and it's hot. I love the way you organized it. So you have 4 main elements in the book and you framed it around an acronym WISE. So maybe you can briefly explain each part.
Absolutely. So we have this acronym WISE, and I just need to tell you that the hardest part of writing a book might actually be finding an acronym. It is so difficult to find something that works, but we wanted something that gave teachers the succinct information they needed in an easy to remember way. And so we eventually landed on WISE for when it comes to teaching vocabulary. The W stands for word consciousness. Word consciousness is your like appreciation of words. It's your ability to use like the precise word when you're speaking or when you're writing. I am very proud to say I believe that I am raising a word conscious daughter. A great example is I just made her chicken noodle soup, and she's sitting there and she's eating her chicken noodle soup and she goes, "Mama," and she's 6, by the way. She goes, "These noodles are divine." Like she could have said, "This is good. This is yummy." But in that moment, she had the precision to let me know that those noodles were something special. That's word consciousness. That's the life we want for our kids. We want them to notice words and to appreciate words and to have it be a part of who they are. And then the I is for individual word learning. That's what you typically think of with explicit instruction. And we have so many strategies to help you explicitly teach individual words. The S stands for student tools for determining meaning. And this one I do think is one that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. We talk a lot about teaching vocabulary words to students, but what we don't talk a lot about is how we can help our students to acquire vocabulary when they're not with us. The biggest way that our students acquire vocabulary over time is through wide reading. And so we have to teach them strategies for when they're not with us. So the big strategies that we're talking about are context clues, using morphology, and then reference materials as well. And so you think when you're teaching context clues, what you're teaching them is you're teaching them when they're reading, can I look around in a sentence and can I get just enough information that I don't have to stop and I can keep moving on? And then the same thing with morphology. Instead of looking around in a sentence, you're looking within the word. So we're teaching them strategies to be successful and to acquire vocabulary when they're no longer with us. And then the E stands for exploration of word relationships. So that's things like synonyms, homophones, homonyms, nuances. And so it's really thinking not just about this one word and teaching this single word, but how are our words connected and how can we help our students to make those connections?
I think of when you think of those 4 elements, you really see how it fits in every part of your day, because there's some that are very direct and explicit instruction through your reading. And then there are things having a casual conversation with kids that the word consciousness comes up. So it really, vocabulary can be every single part of your day.
Beautiful. That explanation was divine.
I love the way you use that word, Michelle.
Look at this. And now the positive reinforcement. I'm going to keep using robust vocabulary because you're proud of me, right? I love it.
And it makes it fun, right? Word learning, we often think of word learning, whether it's phonics or vocabulary, is boring, but it doesn't have to be. And just what you did there, Michelle, is a nice example of that. And then Savannah's response to you was quite divine.
Love it. And then it becomes ingrained.
Exactly.
Because we're giving ourselves multiple exposures to the word, which is also key to vocabulary acquisition.
There we go. All the strategy work behind that. Repeated, distributed practice. So when you think about the strategies and activities you have within the acronym, how did you organize those under each category?
I think something that we learned from the success of the first Megabook was teachers want choice. There are a lot of things that are thrown at teachers with, this is the order you're going to teach it, and this is exactly how you're going to teach it. And we are all bound by that in the classroom sometimes. But I think the nice thing about how we've organized the fluency and also this vocabulary book was that we have these big ideas of the WISE elements. And so we have these are our main 4 chapters, WISE. And within each of those, they're organized from beginning to end by grade level to begin, so that if you're a kindergartner, first grade teacher, you know to go to the beginning of the chapter. And then within each activity, it's not a scope and sequence. You're not going to do activity 1 and then they're ready for activity 2. You can look around and go, this is what I know that we already have covered in the resource that my district is asking me to use, and this is where I need some help. So having that choice to pick and choose, this strategy my kids would love. My kids are very visual and they want to see pictures of things, and this one would work great for my students. Or I really need to teach something on the different types of irony, and so I can choose this strategy. So it gives you a lot of choice, and we tried to make the titles of these strategies descriptive enough that you don't have to read the entire book cover to cover to know which ones that you want and which ones you need. So it's organized in a way where teachers have autonomy and where teachers have choice, so that they can pick and choose what they want to, but in an organized enough way where you know where to go for your grade level.
That's really helpful. And what a beautiful menu. It's like you go to the diner and there's so many options. There are so many options in this book. It really has something for everything.
I think it's like 92.
92 strategies.
92.
Oh, so you did the counting.
And one of the things I'd like to mention is that there's specific examples in the book, but what we really like to do is help teachers expand from that, using these ideas as templates for their own instruction. Nothing in this is scripted. As Melissa mentioned, this notion of empowerment, I think, is so important, especially during these times when everything is highly structured and scripted for our teachers.
Yeah, it brings the art back into your instruction, right? So I'd love to take a moment to go deeper into the acronym, and maybe you can share either one activity or a strategy or even a concept behind each letter in the acronym, maybe one of your favorites or just one high leverage thing that you'd like to share with listeners. So we can start with the W for word consciousness.
Yeah, so I think word consciousness is a fun one because you don't often think about specific activities that you can do to promote word consciousness. It's kind of this thing where you're like, how do I do this? So my favorite one is something that I did for years in school. And we called it Wordy Wednesday. In the book, we're calling it Weekly Word Quest because we're not going to discriminate against the other days of the week. And basically what it is it's a way for your entire school to get together and to look for words and to notice words. And that's what we want for our kids, right? We want everyone to be able to notice amazing words that they're coming across. So what we do is this, there is a question every week, and it could be something like find a word that has a prefix and a suffix. It could be something that's like find compound words. I also tried to model a lot of them off of like the standardized testing that we had. So like one of them would be find a word that uses re in the same way as the word rerun. And then all of the words, the answers would have RE, but they wouldn't all have RE as a prefix. So we have a question. It can be about really anything to do with words. And then what we do is every single teacher has an answer. Some of them will have an answer that is the correct answer to the question. Some of them will have an answer that's a distractor. They wear name tags on the day that we do the question. And then for the rest of the week, they hang their word up outside their door. And then all we do is we let the kids go around throughout the week and they find answers to the questions. And it was really nice to have the whole school participating in it. So even if like kindergartners are not going to go around and find words with prefixes and suffixes, but could you go around the school and do a letter hunt? Could you tell them what the word is and talk about the meaning? So it's really just this way to get your entire school thinking about, talking about, and learning additional words.
That is so fun. And it's so beautiful when you have the whole school on board. And especially if there's instructional leaders listening, this is a way that we can promote joy of literacy too. We're going to develop these beautiful little word conscious children in all of our classes because this is something that we all care about, right? Mm-hmm. So that's such a great strategy. I love that.
For individual word learning, in the show notes for listeners, we do provide one called Describe the Scene, but there's a similar one, and I'm an instructional coach right now, so I'm often mentoring teachers, and the teachers are who I work with mostly, but I needed a kid fix today. So I went to a 5th grade classroom, and she said, could you come in to do something? And I said, can I do a little vocabulary activity while I'm in there? So I grabbed my book and I copied something on the way, and I would like to say it was more well thought out than that, and it wasn't. The kids needed a break and I needed the kids. So I went in and did an activity today called scene analysis in our book. And in that, there's a picture of a different scene. I gave them 4 choices today. I copied all 4 of them and let them choose. The kids kind of look and notice what they see about the picture. And then we have 12 words listed. And some of them match the scene and some of them don't match the scene. And we give the kids the student-friendly definition of each of the words so that they know if it does, because we've chosen these words to be maybe a little more challenging or words they haven't used before or that might be a little bit hard for them. So then they have to put a check mark next to the ones that fit the scene, kind of using that critical thinking to decide an application, and then put an X on the ones that don't fit. And then we give them a writing prompt that's just a short paragraph, and they have to write about that scene using those words. And I really kind of changed the activity when I went in there and added some more fun things to it as we went. One of the words that they had to look at was this word. The scene analysis was a peaceful countryside. It's just kind of like a little cabin looking, and you can tell it's in the country. There are not a lot of houses that are close. And one of the words that they had to say if it fit this or not was the word chaotic. Some of the kids picked this scene. And as I walked up to one of the girls that was working on this, she said, I'm not sure how to pronounce this. And I said, you know what? Great point. Everyone that has peaceful countryside that picked this one, come up real quick. And I said the word to them and they pronounced it back. So they had the pronunciation. And she goes, oh, this word is chaotic. I thought it was chaotic. And and she goes, oh, I know what chaotic is. My mom tells me I'm chaotic all the time. I just had no idea that's how it was spelled.
Great.
But working with kids, they give you the ideas of how to be a better instructor and how to be a better teacher. And so it was fun. We read the paragraphs aloud and we came up with this idea that every time one of the words on their sheet was used, they got into groups with like passages and they had to ding the other person. So as they were sharing, I could hear ding, 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 ding going across, and then gave them a challenge to use that one of the words at home. So it's just so easy to integrate that because within this one lesson, they had these 12 words, and the ones that they chose to use, the teacher and I counted. I said, how many times do you think they used these 4 words that they picked out throughout the lesson? Think of the times that I used it, that they were exposed to it, and think of the times that they used it. And we counted 9 times. And we know that that's around the amount of times kids have to see and use and hear a word in context for it to start to become expressive. And sometimes that can even happen within a lesson. We're not just saying a word one time. Either they used it or we used it 9 times. And so because of that, that started to be cemented into their head. And we kind of fast forwarded that idea of how many times do kids need to hear a word before it becomes expressive, just using it over and over. So that's kind of a fun one for the individual word learning.
I just think too, you were just such a responsive practitioner. And I think that the book lends itself to that too. Like, yes, we have these strategies, but hey, you know your kids too. And if you can extend it with a writing prompt, or if you need to take the writing off for that day, like that's just great teaching. I was going to talk about student tools for determining meaning. So remember, we talked about really like context clues, morphology, and reference materials. The one thing that I want to mention, because I'm obsessed with it in the book, is we do have a morphology scope and sequence that we include for kindergarten, which is just like S, all the way up through 8th grade. And I wanted to point out, research doesn't say that there's any morphology scope and sequence that's better than another one, but we do have some general guidelines that we can follow. We tend to teach Anglo-Saxon first because it is more transparent. It's a lot easier to understand earthquakes than it is to understand chaotic, which is Greek. So we start with Anglo-Saxon because it is the most transparent, and those inflected endings aren't changing the parts of speech, which is very helpful. And then we move into Latin and then finally Greek. And that is really what this scope and sequence does. I mean, there's nothing though that says that like, oh, you have to teach the root struct before you teach the root tract. It's just not like that, but we do have guidance for you in case you want it. And we have a packet that we are going to give you to put in the show notes, and all of these activities that we're talking about, they're included in that packet for you.
We'll definitely link it up, and it's going to be a great download for people to tap into. And then how about exploration of word relationships?
Yeah, I'll take that one. One of the least used books in probably every classroom in the United States is the Thesaurus. I have a hard time saying that. Kind of like a dictionary, I suppose, but it's a collection of words that have similar meanings. Teachers have never been given too much of an opportunity to learn, well, what can I do with that with my students? As a professional writer, the three of us, we use a thesaurus all the time. But these are collections of words that are related in meaning. And so what we did was, this actually goes back to something Melissa and I did earlier, several years earlier. We called it vocabulary letters, and we made sure to include these in our book here. It's the idea of looking at nuances in word and word meanings. And I'll give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. I looked in the thesaurus and I looked for other words that mean walk. And I came up with these: walk, amble, jog, stroll, saunter, trudge, hike, plod, and march. And there's several more. And now what I'd ask you to do is to put those words in order from slow to fast. Now, is there an actual order in which they go? Not really. You know, what we're looking for is for students to get together and start talking about these words and perhaps start using them in their own written and oral language. And then putting that, some people call these vocabulary timelines, to put them on display so the kids begin to use these in their own writing. So instead of using walk all the time, they might use stroll or saunter or trudge or plod or any of those other ones. But it's a great way for getting kids to expand those words that have similar meanings. And of course, we want them to do that because that's going to improve their writing and, of course, give them a handle on more challenging texts that they're going to be reading.
It's such a powerful way for students to have conversations about why they selected certain words as well.
Yeah.
Like, why did you put saunter before stroll, and having a justification for that too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And do you have a personal favorite routine in the book or activity in the book that's near and dear to your heart?
Savannah mentioned earlier the notion of morphology, and I've been a morphology nut for a number of years. The idea is that if you learn one morpheme, and when I'm talking about morphemes, I'm not just talking about prefixes and suffixes, or should say we are not talking about prefixes and suffixes. We are, but much deeper than that. We're looking at word roots or bases. So let's take one that actually Savannah mentioned, tract, T-R-A-C-T. Now that's a Latin root, and it means to pull or drag. If I did this on a Monday, I introduced tract to my students and said, okay, it means to pull or drag. Can they come up with words that have that root in them? And if they don't, I will present them to them. Words like traction, tractor, contract, contract, attract, retraction, abstract art, protractor, distract, extract, and on and on. The idea is that I'm teaching my students one word root, tract, and they have the potential of learning actually over 100 English words. That's the power of morphology, because these words show up in so many ways by adding on affixes. And I'll just add to that also that I talked earlier about the academic scientific words that our students are encountering all the time. Well, upwards of 80% or even more of our academic words are drawn from Latin and Greek word roots. So again, helping kids get a handle on these can really make a big difference in not only learning vocabulary, but of course, conquering those academic subjects that could be challenging for so many of them.
One of the ideas that Tim had that we used in the Megabook of Vocabulary was taking that idea and where they can be the bard. We give them a list of all these roots and the meanings behind them, and they get to create their own word and then come up with what the definition is for that word.
Right.
And so really focusing not on the word really, but that activity is focusing on really that meaning of what these roots are. And I did that in one of the classrooms just to try it out. And man, they loved that activity. And some of them were using 4 and 5 roots within one word. And they were these really, really long words, but it didn't matter. The longer, the better. So that was, it was such a fun idea he had.
So fun. And isn't that how new words are added to the dictionary anyway, right? Like somebody had to use it first.
Well, and the reason we called it Be the Bard is because Shakespeare invented words. Besides writing poetry and sonnets and plays, about 10% of all the words he used, he invented. And most of them are just a combination of roots like bedroom, skim milk, metamorphosis, and so on. And we thought, well, if he can do it, he's a pretty good guy to emulate, right? So let's let kids do it. One of my favorites, I'll just mention, and this came up with a 4th grader. He created the word materman, M-A-T-E-R-M-A-N-D. Well, what is that? Well, all you have to do is break it apart. Mater refers to mother, as in maternal, matriarch, and so on. And mand, M-A-N-D, is found in words like command, demand, remand, mandatory. It's an order. So a materman is a mother's order. So many of the moms out there, I'm sure you would appreciate that when you tell your kids clean your room and they say, why? Well, it's a materman. But it's so much fun to do that. And its playfulness is, one of the things we try to instill in the book, that word study can be fun and enjoyable and can be very satisfying.
I just want to share my favorite activity before we go on to the next one. It's actually an activity that Melissa wrote, and it's the Choose Your Own Adventure ones. And so what it is it's like a story, and you're going to get to a point in the story where you have a decision to make, but you make the decision based off of which vocabulary word you would choose. And the vocabulary words are very difficult, but it's like, if you get it right, you're moving on. If you get it wrong, like your game is over. And it's so much fun. Like it is just a hoot. And it's the kind of thing that like kids don't even realize they're learning. So I think those ones are probably my favorite.
Oh, how fun. It's like a video game.
It is.
Dun, dun, dun. Wrong choice, right? Yeah. So playful. And then when we think about vocabulary instruction, like it doesn't just have to be these 10 minutes in your day where you're focusing on explicit lessons. So how do you think about it when you think about the 4 language domains? And I know that's something that you reference a lot in your activities too, when we have vocabulary for speaking and listening and vocabulary for reading and writing, how that can look.
I think that we found so much importance in that it's right on every strategy page, right on the side. A lot of the strategies are multiple language domains, but it might just be, especially for the younger grades, just speaking and listening. But I think that when we think about where that vocabulary lives during the day, that for a teacher that we don't miss an opportunity with kids. Every interaction that we have with them, even if it's very structured, and I've mentioned this several times because I think that's the most important part, is that once you have the mindset that it's my job, like Savannah said, to expose my students to 3,000 to 4,000 words, I can't be doing one a day. We've got 180-ish days in the school day. So when you start doing the math on that, it can feel a little overwhelming, but you can attack that problem with every interaction that you have with kids, even giving them like feedback on their writing. If the kids are writing up a character description and they do a great job, you could tell them, great job. And there's no useful information that they're going to get from that. You could also tell them that your character development was incredibly vivid, which means you used very clear imagery and I could visualize the story and this character in my mind. I've exposed kids to the word like visualize and imagery and character development and incredibly and vivid. All these words where kids can, and they may not even stop you. They may have heard them before. They don't use them in maybe their own vernacular, but they're understanding them a little bit better and also giving great feedback for writing. So I think it's just taking every opportunity that you can with kids and having that be integrated into how you teach and how you talk to kids.
Beautifully said. And it makes you more conscious of your word choice as a teacher to say every utterance that comes out of your mouth matters. And let's make the most of that time too. So special. When we think about some practices that perhaps aren't effective, some things that we can leave behind, is there any advice for things that teachers can perhaps stop doing?
Oh, plenty. Most of them I'm guilty of myself, but the one I often like to talk about has to do with my son, Michael Rasinski. He's now 47 years old. He's a colonel in the Air Force, and he'll be retiring next month, actually, which shows you how old I am. But I still have some of his papers. We keep them from when they were students, children. And there's one from when he was in fourth grade. He was in a talented and gifted class in the school. And so every week, he and his talented and gifted classmates were given a list of words to learn, except they were given 50 words. The other kids were given 20 because, of course, they were talented and gifted. But the routine was the same. They'd be given these words on a Monday. They'd have to look them up in the dictionary, memorize the spelling and the definition. They took the test on Friday, got an A or B on the test, and had them forgotten by the following Monday. It's just rote memorization. Well, the story is, though, that I found one of these once, and he called me on Father's Day. He was in Afghanistan at the time. And as fathers and sons often do, they run out of things to talk about when they're on the phone. And I had this sheet in front of me. And so I said, Mike, tell me what these words mean. They're words like roseate, rueful. Golly, I can't even remember them now. But they were unrelated, and they were words that I wasn't even sure I knew. And I remember what my son said. He said, Dad, I've never heard of any of those words. And I said, boy, that's funny. You had them in fourth grade. And when I presented, I say, I'm not putting down the teacher. I did it myself when I taught school. I didn't know what else to do. But now this is what we want with our book, is that we can give teachers that something else to do, so it doesn't have to be the rote memorization. And we can lead kids to that deeper analysis and appreciation for words, for sure.
Wow. Yeah. What a great story. And congratulations to Michael.
Yeah, I'll pass that on. He's been around the world several times. He's a pilot, and I don't know. He's going to have mixed feelings about leaving the service.
Yeah.
I might say his experience was divine.
Oh.
Not always, but yeah.
Full circle moment. I love it.
There you go.
And it's so special to think about the opportunities that we give students for word learning and what's going to stick with kids. And I'm grateful that you mentioned that we can do away with memorization, and that goes for phonics and that goes for vocabulary. We really want to try to promote an environment where students are going to be solidifying this information into their brains, long-term memory. They have it until when they're 47 years old and they're moving on to different chapters of their lives.
Yeah.
This book truly is a treasure. It's filled with so many incredible strategies. I love flipping through my copy, and I'm excited for other educators to get their hands on it as well. We'll be sure to link that in the show notes, as well as your free little resource guide that you have available as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And before I send you off, maybe you can just share where listeners can connect with you further, and perhaps even some other offerings that you might have on the table.
Well, I send out free resources every week to anybody who wants them. I call it Morphology Monday, Word Ladder Wednesday, and Fluency Friday. And if anybody wants to get those for free, just drop me an email. So we'll make sure that my email address is in the show notes. But I'm happy to share. It's my little contribution to the field.
Wonderful.
Yeah, they're great. The best way to connect with me is just, sending me a message through, if you have a question or have an idea you want to share, through my Instagram. I would love to see that.
Same thing. Instagram is really where I live most of the time. You can find me at Campbell Crates Readers. I also have a website that's under the same name.
Wonderful. And I'll be sure to link that all in the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing your love of words with me and my listeners. And I'm excited to connect again one day in the future.
Forward to it. Thank you, Michelle.
Much.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.